The wire transfer notification hit my phone with a satisfying chime, the number on the screen a beautiful, round $50,000. It wasn't just money. It was the sweetest, most legally binding victory I had ever tasted, a final, definitive period on a sentence he had tried to write me out of. But to understand how I got this check, we have to go back to the beginning. 6 months earlier, my life was a blur of lukewarm coffee, fluorescent lights, and the incessant hum of the sales floor. I was a junior account executive at a cutthroat tech firm where your worth was measured in quarterly quotas and the size of your commission checks. I wasn't a natural-born shark like some of my colleagues. I couldn't charm a client with a slick story and a firm handshake alone. My currency was diligence. My superpower was exhaustion. For 3 months, I had been singularly obsessed with landing the Sterling Corp account. They were our white whale, a massive, notoriously difficult client that could make or break a career. While others went out for happy hour, I stayed late. My desk a chaotic collage of market research reports, competitor analyses, and color-coded spreadsheets. I learned the names of their CEO's kids, the subject of their CPO's master's thesis, and the exact pain points in their supply chain they didn't even know they had. I lived and breathed Sterling Corp, building a proposal so airtight, so perfectly tailored, it felt less like a sales pitch and more like a foregone conclusion. The potential commission was $8,000, a life-changing amount of money for me. It was a down payment on a car that didn't break down every other week. It was a security deposit on a better apartment. It was freedom. That's where Mark came in. Mark was a senior executive, one of the office's apex predators. He had a Ken doll smile, a collection of expensive watches, and a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room, right before he took credit for your work in a team meeting. He moved through the office like he owned it, all feigned camaraderie and back-patting condescension. One evening, I was hunched over my monitor, tweaking the final slides of my Sterling presentation for the 10th time, when his shadow fell over my desk. "Burning the midnight oil again, champ?" he said, his voice smooth as bourbon. He leaned against my cubicle wall, crossing his arms. "Don't burn yourself out. This place will take everything you've got." I forced a tired smile. "Almost done. Just want to make sure it's perfect for the pitch tomorrow." He glanced at my screen, his eyes lingering on the Sterling Corp logo. "Ah, the white whale," he mused, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Tough nut to crack. I tried to land them last year, but their procurement team is a fortress. They don't budge. It was a classic Mark move, asserting his superior experience while subtly planting a seed of doubt. He was testing my confidence. "I think I found a new way in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been focusing on their new global logistics initiative. My proposal integrates our platform in a way that solves a bottleneck they're facing with their German subsidiary." He raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised for a second before his mask of effortless charm snapped back into place. "Impressive. You've really done your homework." He paused, tapping a finger on his chin as if a brilliant idea had just struck him. "Listen, I still have some of my old contacts from my attempt last year. A guy in their upper management. Let me forward you his info. Maybe name-dropping me could give you a little extra leverage." "Oh, wow, Mark, I don't know what to say. Thank you." I was genuinely touched. In our dog-eat-dog world, a senior exec offering a helping hand to a junior was unheard of. I felt a wave of relief and gratitude. Maybe he wasn't so bad after all. "Hey, don't mention it," he said with a magnanimous wave of his hand. "We're all a team here, right? Just trying to get that big W for the company." He winked, then pushed off the wall and sauntered toward the exit. "Knock 'em dead tomorrow." I watched him go, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. I had my perfect proposal, and now, thanks to Mark, I had an ace up my sleeve. I felt like I was finally being seen, finally being welcomed into the inner circle. I was so naive. He wasn't handing me a key. He was making a copy for himself. The next morning, I walked into the Sterling Corp headquarters feeling like I was floating. My suit was freshly pressed, my leather-bound presentation book felt solid and real in my hands, and the $8,000 commission check was so close I could practically feel its crisp edges. I was escorted to a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor, the city sprawling beneath me like a map of my own future. The 3 Sterling executives were already there, their expressions as serious as their tailored suits. I took a deep breath and began. For the first 15 minutes, it was perfect. I was in the zone, my voice confident, my arguments landing with precision. I could see them nodding, their initial skepticism melting into genuine interest. I laid out the pain points I'd uncovered, the ones their own internal teams had missed. I presented my solution, my beautiful, airtight proposal, clicking through the slides I'd nearly gone blind staring at. They were hooked. I had them. And that's when the conference room door opened. Mark strolled in, wearing that same Ken doll smile. He was holding a cup of coffee like he was just dropping by a friend's house. My heart didn't just drop. It plummeted, taking all the air in my lungs with it. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice oozing false apology. "Just wanted to see how my star junior was doing." He turned his charisma on the executives. "Mark Finnegan, senior executive. I've been overseeing her work on this project." Overseeing? I had barely spoken 10 words to him about it before last night. One of the executives, a woman named Ms. Albright, looked from me to him, confused. "She seems to be doing just fine on her own." Mark just chuckled. "She's a diamond in the rough, for sure. Does all the legwork." He then looked at the oldest executive at the table. "Mr. Davies, right? A colleague of yours, Jim Atherton, sends his regards. He and I go way back." It was the contact he'd given me, the ace up my sleeve. He wasn't just making a copy of my key, he had used it to lock me out of my own house. He walked over to the presentation screen, effectively pushing me to the side. Now where was she? He glanced at my slide, which detailed the German subsidiary logistics. Ah yes, the international integration. This is where my experience comes in handy. For the next 20 minutes, he proceeded to deliver my presentation. He used my data, my talking points, my painstakingly crafted solutions. But he delivered them with a polish and a theatrical confidence I couldn't yet muster. He was the seasoned expert. I was the intern who'd brought him his coffee. The executives, who had been looking at me with respect moments before, now directed all their questions and their impressed smiles to him. I just stood there, my presentation book feeling like a block of lead in my hands. The whole thing was so brazen, so stunningly dishonest, I couldn't even process it. It's the kind of moment that completely reorients your life. And if this is your first time hearing my story, and you want to see what happens when you get pushed this far, you might want to hit that subscribe button. Because this was just the beginning of the injustice. The email from our regional director landed in my inbox 2 hours later. The subject line was, "Huge win! Sterling Corp is a GO." My stomach churned. I opened it to find a company-wide announcement congratulating Mark Finnegan for his tenacity and brilliant strategy in landing the white whale. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. I ran to the director's office, my heart pounding with a desperate, frantic hope that this was all a misunderstanding. "It's a great day for the company," he said, beaming before I could even speak. "The Sterling account," I stammered. "The commission, that was my pitch." He leaned back in his chair, his smile tightening. "Mark closed it. He's the senior on the account, and his relationship with their management was the final piece. The full commission goes to him. That's how it works." It was a death sentence delivered with a pat on the back. The $8,000, my freedom, my down payment, my security, vanished. I found Mark by the coffee machine, laughing with another senior representative. I waited until the other guy left, my hands clenched into fists. "That was my commission," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You stole my work." He took a slow sip of his coffee, looking at me over the rim of the cup with an expression of pure, dismissive arrogance. "Your work was a good start," he said, his voice low and dripping with condescension. "A nice little research project. But you couldn't have closed it. You don't have the gravitas. You get flustered." He gestured vaguely with his cup. "Be happy you got the learning experience. But the money?" He leaned in, his bourbon-smooth voice turning to gravel. Let's be honest, you don't deserve it. You wouldn't even know what to do with a check that big." He winked, turned, and walked away, leaving me standing there, humiliated and broke, with nothing but the bitter taste of lukewarm coffee and injustice in my mouth. I walked away from the coffee machine in a daze, his words echoing in the hollow space where my confidence used to be. "You don't deserve it. You wouldn't even know what to do with a check that big." Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers. For a few hours, I just sat at my desk, staring blankly at my monitor, the celebratory company-wide email burning a hole in my screen. I was invisible. My work, my exhaustion, my breakthrough, none of it mattered. But as the initial shock wore off, the heat of humiliation began to cool and harden into something else. Anger. Cold, clear, and sharp. He thought I'd just roll over and accept it. My director thought a pat on the head was enough. They were wrong. I wasn't going to scream or cry or quit. I was going to do this the right way, the corporate way. I was going to use the system they loved so much against them. The next morning, I sent a meticulously polite email to Carol, our head of HR, requesting a meeting to discuss a commission dispute. I spent the rest of the day gathering my evidence. I printed out the email chain showing I initiated contact with Sterling Corp months ago. I had time-stamped drafts of the proposal from the very beginning, showing its evolution under my sole authorship. I had my call logs, my research files, my color-coded spreadsheets. I put it all into a crisp manila folder. It was my case, my proof. I walked into Carol's sterile, beige office, feeling a nervous flutter of hope. She was a woman who lived by the book, her entire demeanor one of process and procedure. I laid out my case calmly and logically. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I simply presented the facts. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I finished, my hands clasped on her desk. "I understand Mark is a senior executive and that he was present at the end, but the discovery, the strategy, and the entire proposal were my work. The commission policy states that commission is paid based on the work that directly leads to a sale. I believe a 70-30th split in my favor would be more than fair." Carol listened, nodding, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention in such a professional manner," she said, tapping her pen on a notepad. "I'll need to schedule a mediation with you, Mark, and your director to resolve this." A mediation. It sounded official, it sounded fair. My hope grew. 2 days later, I was sitting in that same beige office, but this time the air was thick with tension. My director, Henderson, sat beside me, his arms crossed, refusing to make eye contact. Mark sat opposite us, looking relaxed, almost bored, swirling the dregs of a coffee in a paper cup. Carol began with a summary of HR-approved jargon about finding a mutually agreeable path forward. Then she turned to me. I repeated my case, my voice steady, despite the frantic pounding in my chest. I presented the timeline, the work, the clear and undeniable evidence. Henderson cleared his throat. As I told her, Mark's seniority and his relationship with the client were crucial. He got the ball over the goal line. In this business, that's what matters. The closer gets the commission. Then, Mark spoke. "Look, Carol," he started, leaning forward and placing his cup on the desk. He looked at me, and for the first time, the Kendall smile was gone, replaced by an expression of open contempt. "I'm happy to mentor junior talent." I gave her a huge opportunity to learn, to be in the room. I thought she'd be grateful. He paused, then looked from Carol to Henderson, a conspiratorial smirk on his face. "But now she wants a split?" He let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was a weapon. It was the sound of pure dismissal. For what? For putting the PowerPoint together? This is adorable, really. But we're talking about a major account, not a school project. She did her little book report. I came in and wrote the final exam. My face burned. Adorable. A school project. He leaned back, spreading his hands. She's emotional. She doesn't get the big picture. You can't just give away company money because someone's feelings are hurt. I looked at Carol, my last hope, my belief in the system, dwindling with every breath. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes flickered toward Henderson. She was a soldier, and she knew who her general was. "While your hard work is clearly documented and appreciated," Carol said, her voice devoid of any real warmth, "commission allocation on collaborative sales ultimately falls under managerial discretion. Mr. Henderson has made his decision. There is no policy violation here." The verdict was in. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was designed to protect men like Mark, not to reward people like me. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my now useless manila folder and walked out. I made it to the fire stairwell before the facade crumbled. I slumped against the cold concrete wall, the folder slipping from my fingers and spilling its contents down the steps. My proof, my logic, my reasonable ask. All of it was just trash on a dusty staircase. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the whole building was pressing in on me, the weight of every floor, every desk, every smug, laughing face. That $8,000 wasn't just money for a car or an apartment. It was proof that my exhaustion mattered. It was validation. And they hadn't just taken it. They had laughed while they did it. They had called me adorable. They had told me I didn't deserve it. Right there, in the echoing quiet of the stairwell, smelling of dust and defeat, something inside me finally snapped. The polite, rule-following, hard-working girl who walked into that HR office was gone. They wanted to play a different game, one without rules or fairness. Fine. I would learn to play, and I would burn them to the ground with it. I stayed in that stairwell until the burning in my cheeks cooled and my breathing evened out. My proof, my logic, my perfectly organized case was just a cascade of useless paper scattered on the gritty steps. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there, a monument to my own naivete, but instead, I methodically bent down and picked up every single sheet. The girl who had printed them, who had believed in fairness and process, was gone. She'd died right here on this landing. The person picking them up was someone else entirely, someone with a much clearer understanding of the world. This paper wasn't evidence for HR anymore. It was kindling. Back at my desk, I was a ghost. People talked around me, celebrated the big win, but no one spoke to me. It was perfect. Invisibility, I was learning, could be a superpower. I did my work, I refilled my lukewarm coffee, but my mind was elsewhere. I was no longer a sales executive. I was a hunter, and my world had narrowed to a single target, Mark Finnegan. My superpower had always been diligence, but now I weaponized it. I watched him. I noted the way he always left his computer unlocked when he went for coffee, the way he took long, private calls in the empty conference room at the end of the hall, the way he bragged about his golf weekends with clients. I wasn't looking for a single dramatic mistake. I was looking for a pattern of vulnerability born of his supreme, untouchable arrogance. He believed he was smarter than everyone, which meant he was careless. The break came from the most mundane of places, the shared network drive. It was a digital junkyard, a chaotic mess of old project folders, abandoned marketing materials, and duplicate files. Henderson, in an act of what I'm sure he thought was benevolent delegation, had tasked me with archiving and cleaning up the Q2 sales folders. It was grunt work, meant for the invisible girl who put together PowerPoints. He had no idea he was handing me a crowbar. For days, I sifted through digital debris, my eyes sore from the screen. It was mostly useless. And then I found it. Buried 3 folders deep in a project directory from last year was a folder that didn't belong. It was titled simply Personal. My heart gave a sharp, painful thump. It was his. Mark's name wasn't on it, but the creation date corresponded with his first week at the company. In his haste to transfer files from a personal drive, or in a moment of sheer sloppiness, he must have dragged it to the wrong place. I held my breath, glancing over my shoulder. The sales floor hummed along, oblivious. I clicked it open. Inside were resumes, mortgage applications, and another folder labeled Apex Exit. Apex Solutions, our biggest competitor. The company Mark had worked for before he came here. I felt a jolt, a flicker of instinct. I opened the folder. It contained a single, multi-page PDF separation and proprietary information agreement. It was his exit contract. My hands were trembling as I scrolled through the dense legalese. Non-disclosure, non-disparagement, the standard stuff. But I kept scrolling, my diligence taking over, reading every line, and then I saw it. Section 4B, a paragraph titled Liquidated Damages. My blood ran cold. The language was precise, brutal, and beautiful. It read, "Employee agrees that for a period of 24 months following the separation date, employee shall not, directly or indirectly, solicit or assist in the solicitation of any client or prospective client with whom employee had material contact or about whom employee learned confidential information during his employment with Apex Solutions. In the event of a breach of this clause, employee acknowledges that the resulting damages would be difficult to quantify. Therefore, employee agrees to pay Apex Solutions as liquidated damages and not as a penalty the sum of $50,000 for each such breach." $50,000. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a pre-agreed upon debt, a contractual guillotine just waiting to be dropped. But I still needed the final piece. I needed to connect it to Sterling Corp. My mind raced back to the meeting, to the moment Mark had hijacked my pitch. "Mr. Davies, right? A colleague of yours, Jim Atherton, sends his regards. He and I go way back." My fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened my LinkedIn profile and typed Jim Atherton into the search bar. His profile popped up instantly. Vice President, Sterling Corp. I clicked on his experience, and there it was. Prior to Sterling, he had been the Senior Director of Global Procurement at Apex Solutions for 8 years. He had left Apex just 6 months before Mark did. They didn't just go way back. Mark's ace in the hole, the key he used to lock me out, wasn't just an old contact. He was a protected asset from a previous employer. Mark hadn't just stolen my commission. He had breached his exit contract to do it. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the office fading into a dull roar. The manila folder on my desk seemed pathetic now. I hadn't needed HR policies or a manager's fairness. The system wasn't going to save me. Mark himself had handed me the weapon. He had written a check for my humiliation, and now I was holding the invoice for his downfall, an invoice for $50,000. He thought I wouldn't know what to do with a check that big. He was about to find out. The girl who believed in the system died in that stairwell. The person who walked out was a pragmatist. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. It makes you scream and break things. What I felt now was cold and clean, like a block of ice forming around my heart. It was a clarifying, singular purpose. Mark hadn't just stolen from me. He had given me a masterclass in the way the world actually worked. It was time to show him I'd been paying attention. I became the model employee he and Henderson wanted me to be. I was quiet, efficient, and utterly invisible. I fetched coffee. I took meticulous notes in meetings I wasn't allowed to speak in. I smiled, my polite, empty smile. I performed my own special kind of malicious compliance, embracing the role of the adorable junior who did the grunt work. Mark would stroll by my desk and drop a stack of printouts for the Sterling account on it. "Need you to organize these and create a summary binder for me, champ. The grown-ups have a follow-up on Friday." Of course, Mark. I'd say, my voice a perfect monotone of helpfulness. I'd do it too. I'd make the most beautiful, well-organized, color-coded binder he had ever seen. I was sharpening the blade of their own perception of me. The more they saw me as a harmless, defeated subordinate, the less they would suspect when the axe finally fell. My real work began after hours, not at my desk, but in a 24-hour copy shop across town. The weapon, his exit contract, was digital, but the delivery had to be analog, untraceable. I paid in cash for a private computer terminal. First, I printed the entire Separation and Proprietary Information Agreement. With a yellow highlighter, I drew a neat, bright box around Section 4B, the $50,000 liquidated damages clause. It glowed on the page like a holy scripture of vengeance. Next, I printed the screenshot of Jim Atherton's LinkedIn profile, his employment history at Apex Solutions, a clear, damning link. Then came the final exhibit, a printout of the company-wide email. Huge win! Sterling Corp is a GO, with its glowing praise for Mark Finnegan's tenacity and brilliant strategy. I didn't write a long, angry letter. I didn't need to. The documents told the whole story. On a clean sheet of paper, I typed 2 words: connect the dots. I placed all the pages into a simple manila envelope addressed to the General Counsel at Apex Solutions corporate headquarters. I didn't put a return address. The next day, on my lunch break, I drove to a post office 3 towns over and dropped the envelope into the blue collection box. It was a quiet, anticlimactic moment. The trigger was set, the mechanism was in motion. All I had to do now was wait. The waiting was the hardest part, a low-level thrum of anxiety and anticipation under my placid new surface. 3 days passed, then a week. I started to wonder if it had gotten lost, if it had been thrown away by a mailroom clerk. Then, one afternoon, Mark swaggered over to my desk. The big commission payment was due to hit on the next pay cycle, and he was practically vibrating with smugness. He leaned against my cubicle wall, the same pose he'd struck the night he stole my life's work. "Big day tomorrow," he said, flashing his Ken doll smile. "Payday." Thinking of putting a down payment on a boat. He looked down at me, his eyes full of that familiar, dismissive pity. "You know, I was thinking, you did do some decent research. A good little book report." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, like he was feeding a pigeon. "Why don't you take this?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Go buy yourself something nice, a new pair of shoes or something. Little bonus for all your hard work." This was it, the final gloat. The last twist of the knife from a man who couldn't conceive of a world where he wasn't the one in charge. He thought he was giving me a handout, a final assertion of his power and my pathetic place in the corporate food chain. He was trying to buy my silence, my submission for $100. I looked from the bill up to his arrogant, smiling face. The ice in my chest was perfectly still. The polite, deferential mask I had been wearing for weeks didn't even twitch. I didn't take the money. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was small, quiet, and entirely for me. It was the smile of a person who had already mailed the envelope. The smile of a person who knew about Section 4B. The smile of a person who was about to find out exactly what she would do with a check for $50,000. He mistook my silence for defeat. But it was the calm before the storm I had created. He walked away, shaking his head at my apparent ingratitude, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just been talking to his executioner. The day the commission checks were deposited was always a spectacle. It was a festival of smugness, with senior reps loudly discussing new watch purchases or weekend trips to Napa. And Mark, the man of the hour, was the grand marshal of the parade. He didn't just walk to the coffee machine, he floated, radiating a kind of golden, untouchable arrogance. He made a show of refreshing his banking app on his phone, letting out a low whistle of satisfaction that was meant for everyone, but especially for me. I just kept typing, organizing the binder he'd thrown on my desk. I was the ghost at his feast, a reminder of a victory he'd already forgotten the details of. He was thinking about his boat. I was thinking about Section 4B. The call came at 10:15 a.m. The receptionist's voice over the intercom was flat, but the words cut through the office hum. "Mark Finnegan, you have a call on line 1. A Mr. Alistair Finch. He says it's urgent." Mark sighed with theatrical annoyance. as if being bothered was the price of his genius. He sauntered back to his desk and picked up the phone, leaning back in his chair with his feet up. Finnegan speaking. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. The first 30 seconds were pure Mark. Confident nods, a smirk, the easy posture of a man in control. Then, something shifted. His feet came off the desk and planted flat on the floor. The smirk vanished. He sat bolt upright, his knuckles white on the receiver. His face, usually a healthy golf course tan, began to pale to a sickly, grayish white. He started speaking, his voice a low, frantic hiss. That's not possible. There's no way you could know that. A pause, filled with the tinny, inaudible squawk from the earpiece. What document? I don't know what you're talking about. He was a bad liar. The denial was flimsy, pathetic. His eyes, wide with panic, darted around the office as if looking for an escape route. They swept past me, but he didn't see me. He was too consumed by the voice on the other end of the line, the ghost of a contract he'd signed and forgotten. He slammed the phone down, the plastic crack echoing in the now quiet sales floor. Without a word, he shot out of his chair and stormed into Henderson's office, leaving the door wide open. The entire office was pretending not to listen, which meant everyone was hanging on every word. They know, Mark choked out. His bourbon-smooth voice was gone, replaced by a raw, cracking panic. Apex. Their general counsel was just on the phone. They know about Sterling. Henderson's voice was a confused rumble. Know what? Mark, calm down. The non-solicitation. They know I brought in Atherton. They're calling it a breach. A direct, willful breach. That's impossible, Henderson scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. How could they possibly have proof? And then came the words I had been waiting for, the two words that had been my mantra for weeks. Liquidated damages, Mark whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. They sent me an email while I was on the phone, a demand letter. They're invoking the clause. Henderson, it's $50,000. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. The price of his boat, the price of my humiliation. 50,000, Henderson squeaked. They can't do that. We'll fight it. You don't understand. Mark's voice climbed into a near shriek. It's not a lawsuit, it's a debt. The contract says it's a pre-agreed debt. They're going to file for a wage garnishment. They said they have an anonymous tip. Someone sent them everything. The contract, Atherton's LinkedIn, everything. The chaos was beautiful. Mark was pacing Henderson's office like a caged animal, his hands tangled in his perfect hair. His swagger, his charm, his entire persona was dissolving in real time, under the acid of a single phone call. He had built his career on a foundation of lies and stolen work, and the entire structure was coming down on his head. And then he stopped. In the middle of his frantic pacing, he froze, his back to the sales floor. I could see the gears turning, the frantic calculation in his eyes as he replayed the last few weeks. The HR meeting, my silence, my quiet compliance, the small, knowing smile he'd mistaken for defeat. He turned, slowly. His eyes scanned the room, no longer panicked, but filled with a new, dawning horror. They passed over the other senior reps, over the junior staff, and then they locked on me. I hadn't moved. I was still sitting at my desk, my hands resting on my keyboard, looking right at him. I didn't smile this time. I didn't have to. My expression was perfectly, beautifully blank. He stumbled out of Henderson's office, his face a mask of fury and revelation. The entire office watched as he marched toward my desk, a man walking to his own execution. He slammed both palms on my desk, rattling my monitor. You, he hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that couldn't conceal the terror beneath it. This was you? You did this. I looked up at him, letting a bead of silence hang in the air. I tilted my head, my expression one of mild, innocent confusion. Mark, are you okay? I asked, my voice soft. You look flustered. His face contorted. Don't play dumb with me. The contract. Apex. How? I gave a small, helpless shrug, the same kind of shrug I'd given when he'd told me I was too emotional to understand the big picture. "I'm just the junior who does the book reports, remember?" I said, my voice even and clear. "I wouldn't know anything about contracts or liquidated damages." I paused, letting my eyes drift toward the window, as if contemplating something. "But I guess you were right about one thing." I met his gaze again, my voice dropping to a near whisper, for his ears only. "I really wouldn't know what to do with a check that big." My words hit him harder than the phone call had. His face, a canvas of panic and rage, seemed to crumble. For a moment, he looked like he was going to lunge across the desk, to physically erase the smug, calm expression I had worked so hard to perfect. The entire sales floor was a wax museum, every head frozen in our direction. "Mark! My office! Now!" Henderson's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. He grabbed Mark's arm, his face pale, with the realization that this was no longer a private crisis, but a public execution. He practically dragged Mark away from my desk and back into the glass-walled office, shutting the door with a firm click. The sound seemed to break the spell, and the low hum of the office returned, now laced with frantic, whispered speculation. I didn't move. I just sat there, the ghost at the feast, watching the two men through the glass. I saw gesticulations, pleading, a man utterly broken. An hour later, Henderson's door opened. He looked 10 years older. "Can you join us for a moment?" he asked, his voice flat and defeated. I walked into the office, the same space where Henderson had once rubber-stamped Mark's theft. The power dynamic had been inverted so completely it was almost dizzying. Henderson slumped in his chair behind his desk, a general surveying a lost battle. Mark was sitting in one of the visitor chairs, the one I had sat in during our farcical HR mediation. He wasn't the apex predator anymore. He was small, shrunken, his expensive suit looking like a costume he'd forgotten to take off. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked up at me, and the man who had told me I wouldn't know what to do with a big check was gone. In his place was a beggar. "Please," he started, his voice a ragged whisper. "You have to call them back. Tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. I'll give you the commission. The 8,000? I'll give you 10. Just, please, you have to fix this." I stood there, letting his words hang in the stale air. I didn't look at Henderson. I looked only at Mark. I let the silence stretch, letting him feel the full weight of his desperation. $10,000? I finally said, my voice quiet, but carrying the chill of the stairwell where he had left me. "That was the price for my work, Mark. We're long past that. We're in the damages phase now." Henderson cleared his throat. "Now let's be reasonable." "Reasonable?" I cut him off, my gaze still locked on Mark. "Reasonable was my 70/30th split offer. Reasonable was the evidence I laid out for you in Carol's office. You weren't interested in reasonable. You were interested in the path of least resistance. Well, the path led here." I took a step closer to Mark's chair. "You have a problem, a $50,000 problem, to be exact. A debt that Apex can and will collect by garnishing your wages. You'll be a pariah. And when this company finds out you expose them to a potential lawsuit from a competitor, what do you think happens to your job? To your boat?" Panic flashed in his eyes. He knew I was right. "What do you want?" he pleaded. "What I've discovered," I said, leaning in slightly, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "is that when you're looking for one thing, you often find another. You see, when I found your separation agreement in that personal folder you so carelessly left on the shared drive, I found other things too. Specifically, a folder labeled Client Contacts, Apex, a full list, names, numbers, account histories." Mark went completely white. He looked like he was going to be sick. That part wasn't a bluff. The list was real. I had it saved on a thumb drive in my apartment. It was the second violation, the kill shot. The first anonymous tip was just about the Sterling deal. I continued, my voice smooth as bourbon. "A single breach, but a second tip, one that includes a full proprietary client list. Well, Apex won't just want $50,000 in liquidated damages then. They'll want your entire career. They'll sue you into oblivion. I stood up straight and looked from Mark's shattered face to Henderson's terrified one, the power move, the final term. So here is my offer. It's the only one you're going to get. You are going to initiate a wire transfer for $50,000 to my personal bank account. Not a check, not a payment plan, a lump sum. $50,000? Mark choked out. To you, that's extortion. No, I said calmly. That's your severance. It's the price you pay to sever yourself from this problem. Once I see the cleared funds in my account, I will send another anonymous email to Apex's general counsel. I will tell them I was a disgruntled employee with a grudge, that the information I provided was falsified. I will retract everything. Their case against you will evaporate. You'll be out $50,000, but you'll keep your job and avoid a career-ending lawsuit. I let that sink in. He would pay me the exact amount of his penalty. The money wouldn't go to Apex. It would go to me. The universe, with my help, would balance its books. I walked to the door and paused, my hand on the knob. Pay me the settlement, Mark, and maybe I don't feel the need to report the second violation. It's a simple business decision. And you're a great businessman, right? You know how to close a deal. I didn't wait for an answer. I opened the door and walked out, leaving him in the ruins of the world he had built, with nothing but the echo of my offer. He thought I wouldn't know what to do with a check that big. He was about to write it. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, the wire transfer notification hit my phone with a chime that sounded like a celestial choir. There it was on the screen, a beautiful, round $50,000. It wasn't just money. It was the sweetest, most legally binding victory I had ever tasted. A final, definitive period on a sentence he had tried to write me out of. I looked at the number, and I didn't feel elation or even joy. I felt a profound, ice-cold calm. It was the feeling of a debt being settled. The universe was back in balance. As promised, I sent the anonymous retraction to Apex's general counsel from a terminal at that same 24-hour copy shop. I told them I was a former employee with a grudge who had fabricated the evidence. I held up my end of the bargain. Mark got to keep his career just as I'd offered. For about a month, anyway. The thing about our office was that it was a jungle, and in the jungle the scent of blood travels fast. Mark had paid the $50,000 to stop the bleeding, but he couldn't hide the wound. He had been publicly, spectacularly dismantled. His swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. His Ken doll smile became a tight, desperate grimace. The other Apex predators, who once laughed at his jokes, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was no longer a shark. He was chum. Henderson, who valued strength above all else, started icing him out of key meetings. His accounts were slowly, quietly reassigned. I watched it all from my desk, a silent observer. The end came, not with a bang, but with the quiet scrape of a cardboard box being filled. 2 months after he wrote me that check, I saw him packing his personal effects, his ridiculously expensive pen set, a framed photo of a boat he would now never buy, the world's best closer mug someone had given him ironically. He didn't look at me as he walked toward the elevator for the last time, a ghost in a suit that was now too big for him. He hadn't been fired. He had simply been made irrelevant. He was a cautionary tale, a lesson that everyone in that office learned. Don't get caught. 2 days later, I handed in my own notice. The $50,000, minus what I owed in taxes, sat in my savings account, a glowing monument to my own transformation. I never bought the new car. My old one still breaks down sometimes, but it doesn't bother me as much. I never moved into a fancier apartment. The money wasn't for that anymore. The $8,000 commission had been about freedom from my circumstances. The $50,000 was about freedom from the system that created those circumstances in the first place. It was my burn it all down fund. It was the capital to start my own consulting business, where my name is on the door and the only person I have to prove my worth to is my own client. It was the security to walk away from any table where I'm not being respected. Mark was right about one thing. I didn't know what to do with a check that big. I had no idea it would buy me something as priceless as my own soul back. He thought he was giving me a handout with that $100 bill, but what he really gave me was a master class. And I was a very, very good student. So that's how I got the check. It wasn't a windfall, it was a verdict. It was the price of being underestimated. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever had your work stolen, and you want to hear more stories about how to flip the script and write your own ending, you might want to stick around. This is just the beginning.